I think I speak for all of us when I say that today's NFL is a disgrace. All of this showboating and front flipping and no-look passing, you look like a damn fool, Patrick. With the NFL run by these devious offensive zealots, it feels like the days of defenses grabbing the headlines are gone. But as owner/GM/coach of the newly minted most dysfunctional team in history, I have a new strategy. Per direct orders from Papa Goodell to generate as much revenue for the league as possible, I need a lineup that includes everything needed to shift the conversation back to the defense, for better or worse. Worse is actually better, for the click-through rate. My last video was the same concept but for the offensive side of the ball, so go check that one out if you missed it or want to watch it again. But before we get into some brand new content this season, I wanted to make sure to keep my word and round out our merry band of misfits. Same rules apply, any player from any year from any era, all for the sole purpose of generating headlines. And trust me, I know there are a lot of guys that could make this team that will have to be left out, because defenders are insane. Those of you who recall the last video will remember that we've hired Bobby Petrino to run our offense, so bringing in a defensive coordinator that can match that level of public vitriol is impossible. However, the clear number one candidate is Gregg Williams, the ringleader of the New Orleans Saints Bountygate scandal. From the 2009 season up until the league cracked down in 2012, it was found Saints players and coaches were pooling together thousands of dollars to offer bounties for causing injuries to opponents. Gregg Williams and others maintain this was not about injuring players, of course, but I'd like you to consider this counterpoint presented by Gregg Williams.
Everything in the world to make sure we kill Frank Gore's head. We want him running sideways. We want his head sideways.
I rest my case. Now, were the Saints the only ones to ever do this? Definitely not. But a young Roger Goodell did want to make a clear example of them, smiting the Saints organization with fines and suspensions that banned Gregg Williams from a full season. Since then, Gregg Williams has returned to coaching, but in accordance with being punished by the football gods, he's only been able to obtain jobs under the likes of Jeff Fisher, Hugh Jackson, and of course, Adam Gase. Here, though, he is welcomed with open arms, and he can even call cover zero against Hail Marys to his heart's content, because it certainly makes for good headlines. At the linebacker position, we will begin with the player most predicted to be its headliner, Lawrence Taylor. As the most feared man in NFL history, LT changed the game forever, all while never giving a single damn off the field, cultivating just as much of a love for crack cocaine as he had for cracking heads.
I'd go through an ounce a day. There were times I'd be standing in the huddle, and instead of thinking what defense we were playing, I'd be thinking about smoking crack after the game.
Well, you gotta understand though, it didn't affect my play.
I mean, to be fair, he is totally right. It did not affect his play. But if you want a deeper dive into the more absurd legends and stories from his career, you can watch this video that I'll link on the screen. The guy's voice is a little annoying, but aside from that, it's alright. But while LT was a monster on the field, regardless of his off-field activities, there is zero question that he has to be a cornerstone of any controversial roster. Let's take a step back, though, from Hall of Famer to perpetually suspended by adding Vontaze Burfict to the linebacking core, a player almost universally hated as one of the dirtiest to play the game. His rap sheet stacks all the way back to his high school days, leading with his helmet, down to college, where he would cost his team games with penalties, and even into the NFL, where he would cost his team games with penalties. Over 7 seasons, he racked up nearly $500,000 in personal fines and accumulated 22 games worth of suspensions, the most recent being a season-long ban in 2019 that to this point has marked the end of his career. Well, I guess until now. But you can't just bring in one of the most hated and dirty players in league history without really respecting his elders. So for that reason, we're signing Bill Romanowski to operate alongside Burfict and truly bring out the worst in each other. While you can explain the majority of Burfict's offenses as reckless aggression, Romanowski was downright evil throughout his career. He didn't just go after opponents, he commonly got into fights with his teammates as well, and those were the worst of them actually. This photo is from when he broke the eye socket of a teammate in Oakland, ending his career. But that's not to say that his opponents were treated with respect, Exhibit A on screen. Romanowski racked up an equally long rap sheet as the aforementioned Perfect, but in an even less regulated era, he was able to get away with a lot more than he should have, with a reign of terror that ended in 2 Super Bowl rings and some not unfounded allegations of psychopathy in its wake. Already, at this rate, I'm not even sure that our opponents are going to need to gain a single yard to move all the way down the field.
I'm pissed, and I'm down there just trying to rip that ball out of his hands. And all I could get was a finger. And at that time, I thought it was his, but just whatever it was, I just snapped it. And I could hear a scream at the bottom of the pile.
Since we now have 2 insanely dirty linebackers alongside LT, let's have some fun with the inclusion of Brian Bosworth, whose larger-than-life persona was nicknamed the Boz. Bosworth wasn't an abysmal player by any means, but when you take a single look at him, 1, he was absolutely both a product of his time, and more than anything, a product of his own hype. Before the draft, he not only was suspended for steroid use, but also sent multiple letters of disinterest to different franchises, stating he'd outright refuse to play for them if they drafted him. One of those teams did draft him, the Seattle Seahawks, and then they proceeded to hand him the largest rookie contract in NFL history just to get him to show up. Now, you might be good, but unless you're really, really good, hyping yourself up as the greatest to ever walk on a field is just a path towards being viewed as a failure no matter what you do. And by far, more people remember the Boz's arrogance rather than his ability to back it up.
3rd and 1 from the 2. Here's Bo. And here goes Bo for the touchdown. He and Bosworth one-on-one, and Jackson just shoves him into the end zone.
Now that we have a verifiable core of lunatics behind the line, let's go down into the trenches. Our first defensive lineman will be Mr. Albert Haynesworth, 2008 Defensive Player of the Year, and also, you guessed it, one of the most hated players in NFL history. Haynesworth, like others on our team, lives up to this billing, with his most infamous incident occurring in the 2006 season when he stomped Cowboys center Andre Gurode not once, but twice just to make sure he inflicted the damage he was trying to do. Haynesworth would be suspended 5 games for the incident, which was the longest in history for something done in-game, before Burfict selfishly stole that record for himself. But of course, the fun doesn't end there, as Haynesworth inked an outlandish 7-year, $100 million record contract with the Washington Redskins that is now heralded as one of the worst free agent signings of all time. The reason for that is because the moment Haynesworth received his bag, he became a lazy sack, getting out of shape, fighting with coaches, everything you can possibly do to be shipped out of town after 2 miserable years on a bloated deal. So, in all, another locker room joy for our already very stable NFL locker room. Our next lineman is going to be none other than Ndamukong Suh, specifically plucked out of the Lions era of his career. While the Suh of today is a more respected tackle with the Buccaneers, early in his playing days, he was one of the bigger villains of the sport, recognized as the dirtiest player in the NFL. I mean, when people hear Suh's name even after a decade, the first images that come to mind are still this outburst where he stomped a Packers lineman, this fall where he definitely aims his foot on the way down, and of course, this clip where he stomped on the calf of Aaron Rodgers. You step on A-Rod, you can't really leave that doghouse easily. Considering that Suh has only mellowed out the further he's gotten from his early career, the only explanation is that it was all a manifestation of his anger for being on the Detroit Lions, which, seems decently rational actually. But since we're taking him directly from that heyday, we are right back in business. For our final defensive lineman, we're going to place Aldon Smith out on the edge. Not because he was a dirty player or started fights with teammates every practice, but because the man simply could never distance himself even slightly from the headlines. Smith's career began with as high a ceiling as any edge rusher ever, rivaling draft classmates Von Miller and J.J. Watt as one of the most prolific players in the NFL at getting to the quarterback. But after just a brief glimpse at what that ceiling looked like, it started to cave in. Multiple DUI arrests, a domestic violence incident, and what felt like infinite suspensions began to rain down on Smith with mistake after mistake. And just when things started to look like a feel-good redemption story, down they came again. Even to this day, Smith is in the midst of legal proceedings regarding an assault charge that resulted in his release from the Seahawks, and with the legal issues section of his Wikipedia totaling nearly as many characters as the section on his actual football career, you've got to wonder if Aldon Smith has run out of chances. Fortunately, I'm a believer in 16th chances myself, so Aldon is welcome aboard. No defense worth their salt is complete without a strong secondary, but don't let the second in that name fool you, because there's still plenty of me-first egos to choose from. Starting off with a player that I think should probably earn a captain's patch for this squad, corner Adam Pac-Man Jones. You know a guy's reputation precedes him when you can make a quick Google search and find people ranking his top 13 legal issues, and that's not a joke. If I read you the entire timeline of Jones's off-field problems, this video would be about 45 minutes long, but among the highlights we've got assaulting a man with a pool cue while he was still in college, multiple allegations of hitting or spitting on women at clubs, and most infamously, instigating a Las Vegas nightclub shooting that left a bouncer paralyzed, resulting in Jones being suspended for the entire 2007 season.
You lock niggas up just to get some charges. I hope you die tomorrow. Or open the window so we can get it on camera. Open the window. No, this window back here.
You don't get that bold overnight, and on the field it was no different. He was physical, obnoxious, and unafraid to draw a few penalties, something that he shares a knowledge of with former teammate Vontaze Burfict. So I think it's really only fair that we reunite them once again. On the opposite side of the field, we're going to place everyone's favorite punching bag, Cortland Finnegan. Finnegan's greatest gift by far was his uncanny ability to annoy the shit out of receivers to the point that they would just physically attack him, which, is kind of good strategy, I've got to give it to him. After his infamous brawl with Andre Johnson, both players were ejected and fined $25,000 for their role, but players around the league had such disdain for Finnegan, they actually helped Johnson pay his end of the fine just as a thank you. And I think that tells you just about everything you need to know. Thus far, we've got a decent balance on this defense of complete insanity and name recognition for that 1-2 punch the media is really looking for. But with our final corner, I want to up the ante just a bit and add primetime Deion Sanders to the fold. Neon Deion is deservedly regarded as a pioneer at the defensive back position, the type of superstar that Brian Bosworth would have loved to be. Sanders just had a swagger to the way he played the game that really can't be replicated, and off the field he kept the cameras pointed his way with stuff like a rap career and an 80 grand golf cart to roll up to training camp in Dallas. So since we're looking for players on the defensive end to garner more attention than their offensive counterparts, I'd say Deion is an excellent pick. It's finally time to round out our lineup at safety, and there's plenty of bone crushers to add to our lineup of guys that are just straight up trying to harm people, but I think we'll have to go with Darren Sharper here, who is one of the most hardest hitting safeties in the league.
Oh shit, Darren Sharper, one of the most hardest hitting safeties in the league.
Okay, jokes aside, Sharper actually turned out to be a monster, and not in a good way. Convicted of these things that I'm not going to say aloud because they are not allowed on YouTube. So, in all honesty, I'm really only including this guy because I hope his greatest legacy goes down as the dude who got absolutely toasted by a one-legged Greg Jennings.
You Gumby!
So on that note, there it is, a completed 22-man lineup of offensive and defensive players that will likely end up some combination of suspended, institutionalized, or straight up released by opening day. I don't know if Roger is proud of me anymore, that ship has probably sailed a long time ago at this point, but I do know that we have truly created a train wreck that no one will be able to look away from. That's really all you can ask for in the age of the internet. I mean, who really needs a Super Bowl when you could just watch Juju do TikTok dances and then get absolutely laid out for it? That's just good content. So I guess that's our moral here, at the end of this massive journey, that maybe our real friends were just all the headlines we made along the way.